Good morning, everybody. Welcome. My name is Pim van Baarsen, CEO for the Silverstone Technology Cluster. Very interesting webinar for you today, all about doing businesses in the USA. Before I hand over to Steve, who's going to tell us all about that, just a couple of things. I mean, obviously, this is part of a series of webinars that we're doing. So please do have a look at the website for future webinars that we're organizing on all sorts of different interesting topics. By all means, have a look at our YouTube channel as well, where we have previous editions of all the webinars that you can revisit. A lot of good stuff on there, so please do go and check that out. Steve has provided an awful lot of accompanying materials, and everybody who is registered here today will receive those after the event, so you can look forward to that. You'll also be provided with Steve's details, so you can follow up with him on anything specific. And as per usual, this session will be recorded, so you can always live it back on our YouTube channel. So with that, I'd like to, I need to mention first on the housekeeping stuff. So if anybody wants to come in with any questions, please switch on your camera. By all means, use the chat functionality if you wish, or do the raise your hand functionality. But please engage with us as well. Steve is quite keen to make sure that this is a session that actually helps you with your questions as well. So please don't just sit there, get involved as well. And by all means, switch on your camera, give us a little wave, use the chat function, use the raise your hand functionality, whatever it is that you want to do. So with that, I'll now hand over to Steve. So Steve was a former British Consul General in the US, still fantastically well connected and in a great position to help people, incredibly knowledgeable as well. So I'll now hand over to Stephen, who can take us away.
Thank you, Pim. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, as Pim said, I was in a past life, I was a former British diplomat. I worked for the British government in the Foreign Office for about 30 years. My life was primarily in Asia, where I was ambassador to Cambodia. I was acting High Commissioner to Bangladesh, worked in Korea, Malaysia, a bunch of other places. But I've also spent a lot of time working with and on the United States. And I wrapped up my career, as Pim said, as Consul General in Chicago. So first thing is, what is a Consul General? So in countries where the UK has a broad and complex relationship, political, societal, economic, they kind of have more than one embassy. So in the United States, there was all the political stuff in the DC area. And to be honest, most people there didn't really get beyond DC. There was New York, which was and still is the center for economic affairs, but also because of the UN's headquarters there, it was Britain's UN representatives there. And then there was a patchwork across the US. The two senior ones were Los Angeles, which was primarily for Hollywood, as most of you, I'm sure, will already know, enormous business for the UK. Star Wars is a British company, etc., etc. I did Chicago, and I'll come on to that a little bit. And then the other 5, 6 were thematic. So Houston was all about oil. San Fran was about tech and the Valley. Boston was about the good stuff coming out of MIT, Harvard, etc., etc. Atlanta was to work into the Research Triangle in Northern Carolina and cover that, the science parks that were expanding on the East Coast. Miami was all about the South, really, South America, probably more about drugs, transnational crime, money laundering than it was about business. But so I used to say that for most Brits, the US starts around Ellis Island, drops off around the end of Wall Street. There's the independent holiday republic of Florida. There's something called Texas that we've all heard of, but we don't really know what it is other than it's got oil. There's California and all its complexities, and everything else is buffaloes and raccoons. And for the British government and for the British economy, I did buffaloes and raccoons. So I was based in Chicago and worked across 14 states. And to put that into perspective, and I'm sure a lot of you are already doing business in the US, and if you're not, then I hope that we can carry on talking, because it's a part of the world that I really think that we should all be looking at and looking at perhaps even more seriously now than we have in the past. But the Midwest is that area Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, et cetera. One in three Fortune 500 companies is based there. The collective of the Midwest has a GDP bigger than Germany. Just Indiana, which is, I'll come on to this in a minute, who I work for now, that has a GDP bigger than Austria, and our UK exports to Indiana are bigger than they are to the Ukraine. So, you know, my first piece of advice, and especially I think for those of you that are not as familiar with the US as some of the others, is it's an enormous country and it needs to be treated as such. And the diversity across the United States is astonishing. And no two states are really the same. Their taxation positions are different. A lot of their legislation can be different around things like emissions, carbon usage. Their talent and human resource provisions can be odd, weird, frankly. But there's no uniformity. There's no homogeneity across the United States. And it never ceased to amaze me how too many British companies, I think, were blinded by New York and California. I want to get into the tech space there, therefore I will go to Silicon Valley. That's fine, but it's twice, sometimes 3 times as expensive as going anywhere else. Silicon Valley has priced itself out now. And even when I was working in the US up until 18 months ago, the tech was moving, and it was moving eastwards. Austin in Texas developed as a real competitor to a lot of the good stuff that was coming out of the Valley and Palo Alto. Indiana, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, does the same. So when you're looking at the United States, I have it's my 4 golden L's, and it's location, it's logistics, it's legals, and language. And location is really important. So when I left the Foreign Service in 2017, I realized that after working for 35 years in the government, I needed to make some money. So I decided to go and sell my soul and work for a big consulting company in Chicago, where I worked for 2 years, doing business development, big corporates, and client relations, which was kind of what I did for the British government, working in the Midwest, working with the Kellogg's of the world, the Johnson and Johnsons, the Fords, et cetera. So when I finally hung up my diplomatic passport and my duty-free booze privileges, I'll let you all decide which one was dearer to my heart. I came back to the UK, and I wear 2 hats. One is I represent the state of Indiana, and that's primarily in an investment role, working with UK and Irish companies and working with the European network, for companies that are looking to develop into their businesses in the United States and are considering Indiana as a possible center, or those that don't really know where they want to go and they need a little bit of steering and guidance. The other half plays on that latter point. I am one leg of a 3-legged stool, a partnership that works with UK, European companies that wish to set up in the United States and need some help about establishing their companies. Where should they go? How can they raise capital? How can they access the VC and the private equity, et cetera. So myself and 2 partners. I have one in the United States who does the money. He runs TechCrunch call him a micro VC. He's more really of private equity VC, M&A broker. The third leg of the stool is based in Italy, a lawyer that's dual accredited to the UK and the US, and we work with a variety of UK companies. We have a pipeline at the moment of 5 companies, 4 of whom are in the tech space, but that's a very, very broad area that comes from retail tech through to health, et cetera. So what do you need to think about? I mentioned the 4 L's. What are they all about? Location. I think location is the most important consideration for any British company looking to establish in the US. It doesn't have to be New York. If you're a bank, if you need access to the marketing and the advertising that goes with that, or with your business, then New York's probably a very good option. If you're in engineering, if you're in software, hardware, especially if you're in advanced engineering, I would say New York is not the right place for you. It would be like me saying to you or to an American company, you want to make bits for the auto sector, then London would be the right place for you to establish your factory. We would all know, well, why would you do that? It's 5 times more expensive than it will be in the areas where you are, or further north or east, So New York has its reasons, but it is not a catch-all. And for the same reason, nor is California if you're in the tech space. If you're in biotech, if you're in some of the life science tech, then I would say Southern California, and especially the area around San Diego, is very important. But the message is that you need to treat the United States as a continent as opposed to an individual nation. I often say that yes, that we have a lot of things in common, similar. Be careful with the language bit, George Bernard Shaw and all that, 2 nations divided by a common language. For instance, if you're dealing with Americans, never use the word scheme, because a scheme is something that's quasi-legal. Don't use the expression let's hook up. Hook up has a much more, how can I put this nicely, physical connotation. So these are just 2 common examples, and I know because I've learned through experience. But the location matters. If you're in advanced engineering, I would say you look at the heartland of America. You look at the Midwest USA. For instance, as I said, I work part-time for Indiana. Why would you want to go to Indiana? Well, Indiana is right in the middle of the country. It has some of the best logistics of any state in the US, rail, road, rivers, air. It's a hub of advanced engineering. It's no coincidence that Rolls-Royce, British Aerospace, BP, Northrop Grumman, a lot of the big advanced engineering, especially around auto and aerospace, are in Indiana. Life sciences, pharma, Eli Lilly is based in Indiana. Zimmer, as in Zimmer Frames, the orthopedic corridor in northern Indiana is a whole ecosystem of prosthetics, orthotics, and orthopedic engineering. So if you're in digital imaging, 3D, that type of stuff, you are going to want to look at Indiana for a variety of reasons. Auto, the big triangle on auto, I would say, is Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio. Michigan is primarily the Fords, Chryslers, and GM. Ohio and especially Indiana. Indiana is the second. It tends to be more of the Japanese, not excluding Ford and GM, but Subaru, Honda, Toyota, etc. So if you're in supply chain, if you're in any of the ancillary services around advanced engineering, Indiana. So my point is, look at who your customers are. Look at your supply chains. Look at ease of access. That's your location, but it's also your logistics as well. If you're supplying Mercedes in the Southeast, in Carolina and Georgia, you don't really want to be in Washington State, in Seattle, because it's just going to push your burn rate on your overheads through the roof. So logistics, location, legals. I mentioned legals. I said at the outset that no 2 states really are the same. I hate to say this to you, but you will need lawyers. Again, that's why I've partnered with one, because they are an essential element in company formation, company structures. If you're looking to raise capital, do not look beyond incorporation in Delaware. That makes life easy. It'll cost you about $500 to $600 to set up there, but you're going to need a lawyer. So location, logistics, legal, and I've mentioned language. But those are my sort of 4 key messages. I wanted to move on to, and please ask questions at the end. Anything that I can do to help you if you are thinking about setting up, if you are thinking about Indiana. I should say that Pim's former employer, Xtrac, who work in the motor racing business, I'm sure many of you will know, they're in Indiana too, because of the Indiana Speedway primarily. But so what's going on in the US right now? So let's broaden this out a little bit, and I'd love to have a discussion with you later on if there are issues that you want to raise with me over and above the sort of the micro, the specific for your company, your business, into the broader politics and political economy and trade policy of the United States. So Pim and I were talking before we came on air, and the question was, how different will Biden be to Trump? And I think that depends where you sit in the world. If you're in China, I don't think it's going to be very much different at all. I would expect Biden to take a very robust position on China. His appointment to be the US trade representative, at the moment, there's a guy, you'll keep hearing the name of Lighthizer. So for Lighthizer under Trump, read Catherine Tai, TAI under Biden. Catherine Tai comes from the trade policy world in the United States. She was a trade policy lawyer. She's of Chinese extraction. Her parents were born in China, but she's very, very strong on Chinese protectionism, and especially the aspects of the Chinese business relationship with foreign entities in China, around the exposure of their technology if you wish to establish and JV in China. She's very, very tough on this. So if you're in China, I don't think you're going to see much different. I don't think you'll end up with the tariff battles and the tariff weapons that Trump deployed. I think Biden will take a much more multilateral approach, and will move back from Trump's movement more towards the bilateral. So if you think Trump was anti-WTO, was anti the United Nations, he pulled out of the US's membership application for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is now called the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, but still going. Trump was all about make America great again. Biden has already made it very clear it's going to be about America first. And that's going to especially be so for anyone who is selling into the United States that is likely to want government, military, or even sort of quango governments. So let's say veterinary affairs, if you're in the health tech space. He's made this pretty clear that if you want to sell into those clients, into that market, you are going to need to be a US entity. He's already putting together a strategy and a policy on tax breaks for US companies that come back to manufacture in the United States. And we're seeing this in Indiana this year, remarkably, with everything that's been going on in COVID. This has been one of the stellar years for Indiana in terms of its investment success, primarily domestic. And it's not just Indiana, that goes for Ohio, for Kentucky. A lot of US companies are rationalizing their business operations in the United States and are looking for new, cheaper, strong talent pipeline environments for them to operate. So I think if I could put it sort of bluntly, Trump was all about tariffs, trying to close the balance of trade. Biden is going to be about workers' rights. It's going to be about getting unemployment, which is running very close to 7% in the US, getting that down to historical numbers around 3%, increasing its jobs and growth, frankly, to put it under a David Cameron axiom, but it's really going to be about jobs, and through jobs will come growth. That's what Biden is going to be looking to do. I do not expect him to wage tariff wars. I think he will be much more multilateral and regionalist rather than bilateral. So what does this mean for the UK? Is this a good thing or a bad thing for the UK? And again, I think it depends on what sector you're in. Trump, for all of his failings, and God knows there are a lot of them, but when it came to looking at the economy and the economic relationship between the UK and the US, there were advantages for the UK. The fast tracking of a trade agreement, and there are still trade lawyers and others in the United States who will have you believe right now that he's still contemplating trying to ram it through Congress, so that some form of micro trade agreement, it's most definitely not going to be all encompassing. It will not include agriculture. It probably won't include a lot of the health provisions because of fear that on the UK side about dismantling the NHS, but stuff that has already been agreed in the 5 rounds that they've had and the 130 something sessions they've had, they could encapsulate that into a sort of transitional provisional trade agreement between the UK and the US. And there are many in the United States that believe that Trump is not done with this and may push it through. The diametric of that is, do I think that Joe Biden will rush for a deal with the UK? No, I don't. He's already made it perfectly clear he's not going to sign any trade agreements in his first 3 or 4 months. That's a problem because I'm not going to bore you with the technicalities of United States trade policy, but there's something called Trade Promotion Authority, which is the congressionally approved right for that government at the time to negotiate trade agreements internationally. That runs out in the first half of next year. I think it's April. So he's already said for his first 100 days, there will be no new trade agreements. He said thereafter, he will only sign trade agreements that demonstrably prove their worth in terms of workers' rights and the ability for the United States to improve its manufacturing infrastructure. I'm not sure that a UK free trade agreement will demonstrate a lot of that. So I think we might see a phased FTA, again, exactly as I alluded to with President Trump at the moment. I think when President Biden assumes the office in the end of January, I think we might be looking at something similar. I think also he's going to have to pay homage to the left of his party. And historically, the left of any functioning democracy in the West has never been overly faithful to the principles of free trade agreements and international trade, etc. It's much more about the domestic workers' rights, the rights of unions to represent their members, etc. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the first 3 months, but I'm not overly optimistic that the Prime Minister will get his stated objective of a free trade agreement with the US as quickly as he'd hoped. Other areas of industry that Biden has already identified, when I talked about infrastructure, he's mentioned energy, biotech, advanced materials, which is euphemism for advanced, not just advanced materials, advanced engineering generally. And interestingly, AI. And I think clearly that move to expanding or sustaining the United States position as the preeminent tech entity in the world. I think he's gonna move back from globalization, but equally he will be looking at some regional agreements. And one of these may be of interest to the UK. I mentioned it before, the snappy acronym of CPTPP, Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. I'm not going to get into the politics of why the UK thinks that it deserves membership of that. It's already applied. Japan has endorsed its membership. Others are coming on board. So it is a viable proposition. It's the UK government's, I would say, after the US, and their top priority. If they can get that membership, that will give them access to a lot of the Asian economies that they wish to work with and that they haven't already secured agreements with. So the US were going to sign up to this. I can see the US going down that path pretty rapidly in Biden's first year. And if the UK can get in, then that's a backdoor access to stronger trade links between the UK and the US. I'm going to come up for air there. I've talked at you for 20 something minutes. Please, no such thing as a dumb question, either on your own company and on where do I think you would best fit geographically. Equally, if you would like to broaden it out to the major issues on politics, the economy, trade, and if we and my partners can be of assistance to you going forward in your business expansion into the US, please don't hesitate to let us know. And if you are interested in joining the 100 or so UK companies that are already in Indiana, equally, please let me know on that, and I'll be delighted to help explaining all of the incentives and the tax breaks and everything else that Indiana will offer UK companies who are looking to set up there. Most of these materials are in the attachments that you're going to get. And I'm also going to send you through my 10 golden rules that I snaffled from the US government, the 10 key steps to investing in the United States: legal, location, tax, immigration, banking, recruitment, back office, insurance, incentive, and looking at how do you access the money? How do you get VC and private equity in the United States? I'm not going to go into details on those because they're coming in an attachment, so you can have a look at them, and by all means reach out and discuss them with me. So I'm all yours, really. Pim, if you and I wanna help, then on the questions, I've got one in from Iqbal. Does Brexit and the break of the Good Friday Agreement have an impact with UK-US FTA? Yes, it does. Biden will play to his Irish roots, and not only Biden. Again, I'm not sure if most of you realize this, but there is an Irish caucus in the Congress, and there is a Scottish caucus in the Congress as well. The Welsh have tried, and although they've got some US politicians with Welsh heritage, the Scots and the Irish have done very well, but the Irish are incredibly strong in DC. Their lobbying is very, very impactful. So would any breach of the Good Friday Agreement have an impact on UK-US FTA? Yes, it would. I'd go further than that. It will have a serious impact on UK-US relationships in Biden's first year. It is something that the British government needs to be very, very cognizant of, and they know it, but it's rock and a hard place a little bit. What do you do with Northern Ireland and Ireland? So it's a really, really good question. But just because the governments don't get on very well, if nothing else, that has been proven about the US economic resilience is that disconnect between US business, US commerce, and its government. So even if the FTA, doesn't pan out, and that, the export market is looking a little bit less positive than it was, the opportunities to set up rep offices, fully fledged manufacturing, access to capital, et cetera, will not be impacted.
Thanks, Steve. While we wait for other questions to come in, I had one for you as well. Because you mentioned location as being one of the key issues, and you also mentioned one of my previous companies, Extract, having set up in Indiana. I know that's worked really well for them, and they're doing a great job there. But obviously, sort of setting up premises there and getting staff in place and all that sort of stuff is probably the most expensive way of doing it.
Yep.
And I should imagine that if you're new to the US market, that might be a very costly undertaking. Are there easier ways to have a run up to it? I mean, can you find distributors or people can act on your behalf, or agents, or any of that sort of stuff? What are the various options to look at, and is there a way that you can ease yourself in, or do you just need to bite the bullet and set up shop properly?
The short answer is I would bite the bullet, because a lot of states, including Indiana, will make it far easier than you can possibly imagine. They realize the complexity, and the fact that you need lawyers and et cetera, et cetera. To give you an example, just to set up a Delaware a Delaware incorporated entity in the United States, with everything that goes with that, and let's say you wanted to set it up in Indiana, that would cost you around $1,500, depending on which law firm you use. If you use the people that I work with, about $1,500. The states will then have an A to Z partnership with you to take you through every single step. So in answer to your question, it's not as expensive as you think. The expense comes with finding the offices, but again, a lot of states will help you with that, as Indiana does. Indiana is very conscious of the fact, as is, and it's not just Indiana, others, as I said at the outset, the UK will think New York, it'll think California, it won't think of Indiana, it won't think of Ohio, it won't think of Kentucky. it needs to sell itself. And how does it sell itself? It sells itself by ease of doing business, ease of establishing business, ease of recruitment, tax breaks, etc., etc. Can you do it through distributors and agents? Yes. My advice is make sure that you know who they are. I'll give you a classic example of a company that I worked with 4 years ago. They worked in the advertising and marketing space and did a lot of filming they were actually working for Rolls-Royce. They decided that they didn't need to set up, they could just recruit 2 cameramen. They would give them instructions, tell them what to do. Here's the script, here's the scene, the scenario. And the 2 cameramen had purportedly worked for 15 years in the business. Cut a long story short, one of the cameramen did not know one end of the camera from the other. Truth is an elastic concept when it comes to a lot of these things. So yes, if you know the distributor, if you know the agent, that's fine. There's a gradation of, you don't have to go from nothing to manufacturing. You can look at hubs, manufacturing hubs. You can think of rep offices. You could even think of a licensing agreement or a partnership. But again, I'd be wary about those.
We have a couple of other questions coming in.
Okay.
One from Rob Purdy, maybe if you can see that.
Yeah, what does it say?
Does
Indiana offer companies supports business support services?
Free trade ports and all that?
Yes, it does. I think I've just answered most of that, Rob, but if you want to talk about it after the fact, and most states will as well. The thing about Indiana is it does have free trade ports. One is around the airport. But what it also does is it sort of negates your tax position anyway to start with. That won't always help on tariffs and customs, but can Indiana help? Yes, it can, but a lot of other states can as well. I don't want this just to be about Indiana. They happen to pay my electricity bill, but you know, there's a lot more life out there than Indiana. I like them because they are easy to deal with. They recognize what they need to do to attract guys like you. But there are options depending on what your business is, Rob, and let's talk offline. You might want to look at if it's, you know, big engineering, you might want to look at some of the Southeast states, Georgia, Carolinas, or those that are attached to the Great Lakes system, like Indiana, Ohio, Michigan. I saw another one on China, I think. Tracking back about 2-3 years ago, China imposed some limits on outbound investment. It sounds like the US may be heading in the same direction, US first. So is this likely to result in a decrease in outbound investment by US firms? Yeah, I think it will, frankly. I don't think it's just China either. I think what Biden has already said, and bearing in mind, he's not going to take office for another, 4 weeks? He's already said that one of his first moves is going to be tax breaks and other economic concessions for companies that reshore part of their operations. The trick, and I think is going to be in the language, is it going to be their full operation, or is it going to be, let's say we're going to close down the Slovakia plant and move it back to Indiana? So the devil is going to be in the detail, but do I think it's going to see, are we going to see an impact on the amount of outbound US investment? Yeah, I do. I think the UK will probably do all right in about 2 or 3 years when we finally get our act together and work out what Biden really is and what he means and all the stuff that he wants. I think Biden will play a strong hand in the EU. I think you'll see a changing EU relationship. So you might see encouragement for US to head more towards EU. That might come at the cost of the UK. But I think in the first year, especially, it's going to be really important for Biden to demonstrate and to reconfirm what he said during the election and provide some solace for the Republicans that he's not going to scrap the Trump agenda. He's not going to go back into a freewheeling free trade economy. Yes, it may not be make America great again, but it will be first, America first. And he cannot be seen to be unshackling a lot of the things that have gone on over the last 4 years, simply because the Republicans will they'll rail at it. And he has to be very careful about presentationally what he's seen to be doing. But it's a really good question. I think it's going to be very interesting.
And also his relationship with Congress, right? Because
absolutely. I mean, at the moment,
it's difficult for him to do what he wants, right?
At the moment, and that's why Georgia, this upcoming election in January, is going to be so important. At present, Democrats still have the House of Representatives, but they do not run Senate. And it's going to be very, very difficult for him to get a lot of his more controversial legislation through. You're going to hear something about the filibuster, and the filibuster is the ability that Senate's had for over a decade, that it can restrict the passage of legislation through to the majority. If you do away with the filibuster, in other words, the restrictions, so it doesn't have to be 2/3 or in excess of 60 odd, it gets down to simple majority of 51%. If the Democrats can pick up a couple of seats in Georgia, they would then be in a position, if they remove the filibuster, to actually enact legislation. So you're going to hear about the filibuster. The other thing you might hear is about packing the Supreme Court. Personally, I don't think he'll go down that path very, very early on. But yeah, I mean, he's hamstrung by what's going on in Congress.
Right, there's an interesting question from Neil that I kind of, as soon as you mentioned it, I anticipated this question coming in. He's saying, we are about to start a joint venture or licensing agreement with a company in Indianapolis. You said you would avoid this sort of relationship. Can you explain why?
Yeah, I mean, maybe avoid's the wrong word, but look carefully at it, because a lot of companies in the US will tell you one thing and do something else, frankly. You need to be in a state where your recourse is strong. And actually, if you're doing it in Indianapolis, the recourse is strong. It would depend on how well you know the company that you're working with. I'm assuming if you're about to start that agreement, you've done your due diligence, the lawyers are involved, et cetera, et cetera. So avoid is probably the wrong word. Be careful. Dealing with the US can often be like dealing with a lot of the Asian economies. There are parts of the US where it can be a little bit more of a free-for-all. If you're in the Midwest, if you're in Ohio, if you're in the heartland of engineering, and depending on who the licensing agreement and the JV is with, if it's with a big company that can't afford to have adverse marketing and reputational hits, then you will be fine. But I'd like to talk to you about it, and I'd like to sort of make sure that you've dotted the I's and crossed the T's. It's really important. If you've got it right, it's a fabulous way to go, because you then you're in essence, you're a US entity. That then opens up into the Department of Defense, the military, which is a huge, huge client for a lot of the technologies coming out of the UK. So it would all depend on where you are and who you're with. And it's, as long as you've done your due diligence, if the company is not just a simple startup that nobody knows anything about, then I would be wary. But I'd be really happy to talk to you about it and see if we can help. If you're setting up a licensing agreement JV, I mean, you're moving into the state, I'd be delighted to put you in touch with the state government there, so that, that'll add an extra layer of reassurance for you. The last thing any state like Indiana wants is for these things to go wrong, because as soon as you start having any form of negative reputational stuff going on, it's you're tightening the veins and the arteries for your lifeblood. And therefore, a state like Indiana that is so dependent on its manufacturing and its engineering and partnership agreements like this, they are more than happy to be closely aligned and affiliated and do whatever they can to make life easy for you. So I would almost guarantee, especially if you're in Indianapolis, you're safe as houses. But there are some areas of the US which I would say are less stringent in applicability of rules and how companies behave.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned about sort of the relationship and getting to know the people is very important as well. We've worked with another company that tried to expand in the States a little while back. This is in one of my previous jobs, and it kind of turned out, because they went down the distributor route, and it kind of turned out that the guy just wasn't as good and well connected as he claimed to be.
That's the issue right there, Pim.
He exaggerated his own importance, and it's you need to be careful not to fall for that. I mean, they subsequently, that failed, and they subsequently went with another guy, And that's worked really brilliantly,
Yep.
because it turns out this guy didn't overstate his own importance and influence, and that worked brilliantly. So I do think it's building up that knowledge and that understanding, and getting to know who you're engaging with.
That is absolutely spot on. I mean, it goes back to that story about the guy who didn't know one end of the camera to the other. But you know, if it's an established entity, they've got a track record, they know what they're about. You know, then I would actually steer you towards the Indianas, the Ohios of the world, because you know, they can't afford for it to go wrong. I mean, it has. You lose one investment, that sends ripples through the investment community. Why did company X decide to leave Indiana or Ohio or Michigan or Kentucky? I mean, I don't want to be disrespectful, but Illinois has some real issues right now on the state of its state budget and therefore its infrastructure plans. And you know, that has become well known, and it's really, really hurting them, because you know, if you're in the engineering space and you need good logistics, you need that functioning rail and road network, you want to make sure that in 5 years' time that what you have now is the bare minimum. In fact, it's going to get better, not get worse. And so again, you look at those states that have balanced budgets, they have strong infrastructure plans, they're looking at port development, airport development, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Neil, I'd really like to talk to you about it, and I'm sure it's fine. And please don't think that I'm saying don't go to Indiana. I'm saying quite the opposite. But I just want to make sure that you know who you're going with, and I can put you in touch with the people in Indianapolis who can help you along the way.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, we've had an experience of having a company in the US before, and so we had a workshop in North Carolina from 2010 to 15.
Yeah.
We found it very difficult to manage and very difficult to get good people. In the end, we closed it down when our customers said that they really didn't mind if we were in North Carolina or in the UK. So, but now we've got a slightly different opportunity. So we're working with a company in Indianapolis who we've known for a long time.
Right.
They're not very big. But perfect. I would certainly like to speak to you about, what we should be doing before we start spending lots of money, because we're going to be buying things to install in their workshop. So that might be something that you could help with.
If you've known them a long time, if you're going to be spending money in the state, I can work with you to try and get you some tax breaks on that, right, which will help you on your overheads. Talent supply for engineering in Indiana is right up there. There's one university, Purdue University. If I tell you that all of the universities have that sort of the nickname, the mantra, the motto. They're called the Boilermakers, and they're called the Boilermakers for a reason, that it's one of the top engineering schools in the world. And the pipeline, it's why Subaru stuck their non-Japan global headquarters right next door to the university. British Aerospace sponsors a lot of the aviation, avionics, and aerospace technologies that come out of there. It's a fabulous engineering environment in that area. Indianapolis itself has a link to Purdue University. It's I'm not going to bore you with it. Indiana University, Purdue University. It's called UIPUI. Not a great acronym again, but and it's a meld of the two universities to be in Indianapolis, to work with outfits like yourself to make sure you get the talent pipeline and the supply you need. But let's take this offline, and I think you're going to get, Pim, you're going to send out my email contacts and stuff, right? So please get in touch, Neil, and let's go from there. But we can definitely help you with this. If you're putting money into the state, I can get money back for you.
Great.
Oh, that sounds very useful. Just another question from me. I mean, obviously the States is an absolutely vast marketplace, and I'm sure it can be very lucrative. But is there sort of help or support or market research available or anything like that to assess what the appetite would be for your products and for what you're trying to do, and how can you best go about that? Because it sounds like it could be a very worthwhile leap, but it's also quite a complex one. So how can you gain confidence that it's the right thing to do? Can you expand on that, please?
Yeah, there is an outfit called the Council of American States in Europe, CASE, and their constituent elements are the states that have functioning business development and economic development operations across Europe, and it covers about 20. And it's those states, as you'd imagine, that have very strong engineering, manufacturing credentials. So it is Ohio, it's Indiana, it's Georgia, it's the Carolinas, it's upstate New York, it's Michigan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There is the domestic UK machinery and infrastructure, but that tends to be a lot more about, in its essence, I shouldn't say this, but I'll say it anyway. It's more about attracting US investment into the UK than it is helping UK investment outward. And the organization that I like a lot is called Select USA, and you'll see in the attachment that I've sent out to everybody, they're a branch of the US Department of Commerce. It's their International Trade Administration. They have events around Europe regularly. But as its name suggests, this is how you select what is right for you in the United States. But if you have any of your guys, Pim, that would like me to help them, I can do it on a sort of, pro bono. If they want to do it professionally, that's what my other consultancy does. That's what the Three-Legged Stool does. We work for companies. We have one that is looking at the West Coast. We have one that happens to be looking at Indiana. 2 more are looking at the Midwest. So on a professional level, I do that, but I'm also more than happy to help make introductions to allow your members and other British companies to try and make that decision. Where should I be? Why should I go to Indiana rather than North Carolina? Who do I believe in? All of this stuff. I can help with that too.
Excellent, very good. Are there any other questions or things people would like to bring up? I'm always conscious that once we have an expert in the room, we want to make sure that we don't leave with any questions unanswered. So is there anybody who has any questions or anything they would like to ask or know? No, doesn't look like it, right?
There you go. I've obviously covered the waterfront thoroughly.
Yes, it looks that way. All right, so thank you very much, Stephen. That's been very helpful. I mean, as I said, we will be sending all the materials that Stephen has provided to all of you as well. So you get that, and then obviously you'll get Stephen's details as well. So there may well be things that you want to follow up with him on online as opposed to doing it in a public forum like this one. So thank you all very much for attending, Stephen. Thank you very much for that presentation. I thought it was excellent. What I'd like to do now, as per usual, is run a little feedback poll for you all, just to help us get a feeling for obviously what your thoughts were on this particular event, but also please do let us know what else you would like to learn about, because then we'll look to put those on in the future. So it should only take a couple of minutes or so, actually probably less than that, probably less than a minute. So if you could have a go at filling that in, that'll be good. In the meantime, I'd like to say thanks for watching to our YouTube audience. I hope you found it insightful. Please check out our website for any upcoming events. Please also check out the other videos on the channel. Also, whenever I watch a video, everybody says, please like, share, and subscribe. So could you do that here as well? Apparently, it's really useful. So please have a go. Thank you. And thanks for watching, and we hope to see you again soon.